Trapped on a lonely hill, 60,000 soldiers stood, surrounded by more than 300,000 enemies. The sky burned crimson, the earth shook, and for weeks fire and death ruled the valley. It was not a battle, it was a siege, a test of endurance, genius, and will. Walls of earth rose against walls of men, and the fate of a continent hung by a thread. Here, discipline clashed with defiance, steel met faith, empire faced freedom. When the smoke cleared and the blood dried, a nation would fall, an empire would be born, and Europe would never be the same again. The year was 52 BC. The land of Gaul, vast forests, rolling hills, and hundreds of proud tribes, had endured years under the shadow of Rome. Julius Caesar's legions had marched across rivers and mountains, building roads, fortresses, and fear. Their standards, crowned with golden eagles, shone over every conquered town, and their discipline crushed all who resisted. To many Gauls, Rome was not just a conqueror, it was a chain tightening around their necks. The great forests whispered of Roman cruelty, and the ashes of burned villages marked the steady advance of the legions. But among the Gauls rose a man, Vercingetorix, the chieftain of the Arverni tribe, a warrior with golden hair, a voice like thunder, and a dream of freedom. He was young, proud, and shrewd beyond his years. He saw that the tribes of Gaul, divided by centuries of rivalry and vengeance, could only survive if they stood together. Through fire and persuasion, he united them. Messengers rode across mountains and rivers, carrying his call to arms. One by one, the tribes answered. Warriors from the north, the west, the plains, and the forests. For the first time in centuries, the scattered tribes of Gaul became a single army bound by one purpose: to drive Rome from their land. Gaul roughly corresponds to modern-day France, Belgium, and parts of Switzerland. It was a land of wild beauty, deep woods, misty valleys, and rivers that shimmered like silver. Its people were fierce, proud, and untamed. They lived by the sword and by the strength of their oaths. Far away in Italy, Caesar heard the news of rebellion. He knew at once that this uprising was unlike the others he had crushed before. This was not a mere skirmish in a distant province. It was a storm that threatened to undo years of conquest. At that time, he had 6 legions at his command, about 30,000 Roman infantry, and 5,000 cavalry, mostly Germanic allies. He was outnumbered, but Caesar's power did not rest in numbers. His strength lay in discipline, in engineering, and in the iron will of his soldiers. Every Roman legionary was a craftsman of war, trained to fight, march, and build with perfect precision. Their discipline was their shield, their obedience, their weapon. The Gauls, by contrast, were fierce but divided. Vercingetorix' host could reach nearly 80,000 warriors, with another 250,000 from allied tribes ready to answer his call. They fought with passion and the desperate courage of those defending their homeland. Their banners were painted with beasts and gods. Their war cries rolled like thunder across the plains. But for all their bravery, they lacked what the Romans possessed: unity, order, and the genius of siegecraft. The stage was set. Caesar, the master of calculation and audacity, faced Vercingetorix, the master of spirit and unity. 2 worlds collided, the precision of Rome against the wild heart of Gaul. Vercingetorix knew that to face the legions in open battle would mean destruction. His strategy was one of patience and deprivation. He ordered his warriors to burn their own villages, destroy their own fields, and hide their food. He sought to starve the Romans, to leave them lost in a wilderness of ashes. His was a war of endurance, not confrontation. Wherever the Romans marched, they found only smoke rising from the ruins and empty granaries. Yet Caesar would not retreat. He understood that if he withdrew now, Gaul would rise again, stronger than before. So he struck with speed and precision, capturing key towns, punishing defectors, and breaking the will of those who wavered. His legions built fortresses in days and bridges in hours, advancing like an unstoppable machine. One by one, the Gaulish strongholds fell, until Vercingetorix and his remaining allies withdrew to a mighty hill fort, Alesia. Perched high on a hill and surrounded by rivers and valleys, Alesia was the perfect stronghold. Its steep cliffs guarded three sides, and its walls, reinforced by stone and timber, commanded the plains below. It was here that Vercingetorix prepared to make his final stand. Inside its walls, his warriors gathered their last stores of grain, sharpened their spears, and swore their oaths to the gods of their ancestors. As the legions approached the hill of Alesia, Caesar looked upon it and saw his destiny. He understood that this would not be a mere siege. It would decide the fate of Rome and of Gaul. To win here was to secure an empire. To lose was to lose everything. The air grew heavy with expectation. The drums of war began to echo through the valley. One side fought for dominion. The other fought for survival, for freedom, for their very soul. When Caesar's legions reached Alesia, now Alexandrian in eastern France, they saw a fortress that seemed built by the gods themselves. The city stood high upon its hill, its cliffs sheer, and the Ouse and Oseren rivers curling protectively around its base. It was a fortress of nature and men, almost impossible to storm. Inside, Vercingetorix commanded nearly 80,000 warriors, their spirits high, their faith unbroken. He believed time itself would destroy the Romans. But Caesar saw something else. He did not see a fortress to be attacked, but a trap to be closed. His mind, sharper than any sword, conceived a plan that would defy belief. He would not storm the walls. He would let hunger, thirst, and despair do his fighting for him. Day after day, the Romans began to dig. With axes, shovels, and iron picks, they cut into the earth. Under the steady command of their centurions, the Roman legions worked from dawn until nightfall, their movements as precise as clockwork. They built a wall of wood, turf, and stone encircling the entire hill, 16 kilometers long, with towers rising every 80 feet, deep trenches filled with water, and hidden pits lined with sharpened stakes buried beneath the soil. The circumvallation, Caesar called it, a ring of death drawn tight around Alesia. It was both a prison and a weapon, sealing the fate of those within. Inside the fortress, the Gauls watched from the ramparts in disbelief. They had fought many wars, but they had never seen such order, such discipline, such silent purpose. The Romans did not shout or boast. They labored as if possessed, their shovels and hammers striking in rhythm, each blow echoing across the valley like the drumbeat of destiny. To the Gauls, it seemed the earth itself was bending to Caesar's will. Then Caesar did something no one could have foreseen. He began constructing another wall, this time facing outward. This second fortification was even more astonishing, a mirror image of the first, meant to defend his army from the outside. Between these two rings of fortifications, the Romans themselves were trapped in a narrow corridor of earth and wood, hemmed in by two enemies, the starving army of Vercingetorix within, and the unknown host that might soon come from without. It was a gamble so daring that only Caesar, with his cold brilliance and iron nerve, would dare attempt it. In total, more than 25 miles of ramparts, towers, ditches and traps rose across the fields of Alesia, a colossal work of engineering unmatched in the ancient world. What had begun as a battlefield had become a monument to Roman ingenuity and to Caesar's unyielding ambition. Days turned into weeks. Inside Alesia, food supplies dwindled, grain ran out, and even the horses grew weak and thin. Children cried through the nights, their mothers whispering empty promises of bread. The warriors gnawed on scraps of leather, on roots pulled from the ground. Disease began to spread, and yet through it all, Vercingetorix stood tall before his people. He rode among the men, his armor shining, his voice carrying across the ramparts as he spoke of honor and endurance. He told them that allies were coming, that across Gaul the tribes were uniting once more, and that a vast relief army was marching to their aid. Until then, he said, they must hold fast. Outside the walls, the Romans built their own form of endurance. At night, fires burned across the hills, thousands of them, stretching in an unbroken line around the valley. From the heights of Alesia, Vercingetorix could see the flickering glow, each flame marking a Roman camp, each spark a silent reminder that the noose around his people was tightening. The air was filled with smoke, and the faint clang of hammers and armor, the sounds of an empire preparing to crush its final foe. For weeks, the fires of Alesia burned, smoke drifted over the valleys like a warning to all of Gaul, and the call was indeed answered. From every corner of the land, men came, the Aedui, the Senones, the Carnutes, the Bituriges, and countless others. They marched under banners painted with wolves, eagles, and the sun, their shields gleaming, their faces streaked with paint, their chariots rattling across the plains like thunder. They came for their leader, Vercingetorix, and for the freedom of their people. By late September, the earth itself seemed to tremble. A massive relief army, nearly 250,000 strong, appeared on the horizon. The hills around Alesia echoed with the cries of horns and the pounding of war drums. The banners of Gaul rippled like fire beneath the pale autumn sun. From the Roman ramparts, Caesar's soldiers watched as the storm gathered, an army within the fortress, another outside in the fields. They were surrounded on all sides, a small force caught between two great tides of war, yet still they did not falter. When the attack began, it was as if the sky itself had split apart. The Gallic cavalry surged forward, their horses foaming, their cries raw and savage. The ground thundered beneath their charge as Roman archers loosed volleys of arrows from the towers. Great ballistae hurled bolts that screamed through the air, shattering shields and bone alike. The earth shook with the clash of iron and the weight of the onslaught. Caesar's legions held their ground. Behind the ramparts, they locked their shields in a solid wall of iron, their faces set waiting for the command. When the Gauls reached the outer ditches, the Romans unleashed a storm. Javelins darkened the sky, stones and burning pitch rained down. The front ranks of the Gauls fell screaming, crushed under the weight of their own fury. Yet more came behind them, wave after wave, their courage burning brighter than their fear. Inside Alesia, Vercingetorix saw the signal fires blazing in the distance. His heart surged with hope. He gave the order, and the gates of Alesia swung open. From the heights of the fortress poured tens of thousands of warriors, charging downhill into the Roman lines. The ground quaked beneath their rush. What followed was chaos, the meeting of two worlds, the fury of Gaul against the precision of Rome. Steel clashed with steel, men screamed, horses reared and fell, and the valley became a furnace of dust and blood. For a moment the Roman line wavered. The air was thick with smoke, and the cries of the dying drowned out all else. Then Caesar appeared, riding along the embattled lines, his red cloak flashing through the haze like a banner of defiance. His voice rose above the noise, "Hold the wall for Rome." The men rallied to him, their courage reignited. With renewed strength, they counterattacked, their discipline cutting through the chaos like a blade. Inch by inch, they drove the Gauls back toward their walls. As night fell, the valley lay carpeted with the dead. The cries of the wounded echoed through the darkness, mingling with the hiss of smoldering fires. Neither side had won, but Caesar had not yielded. The Gauls withdrew into the night, their torches flickering like dying stars. Both armies knew that when dawn came, the true battle would begin. The next sunrise would decide not just the fate of two armies, but of an entire people. And on that long haunted night, as mist settled once more over the silent hills, the fate of Gaul hung by a single trembling thread. Dawn broke over Alesia, pale, cold and silent. The mist clung to the hills like ghosts. No songbirds sang, only the low hum of thousands of men sharpening their blades. Inside the fortress, Vercingetorix gathered his chieftains. Their eyes were hollow, their armor dull. They knew this day would decide the fate of Gaul. He raised his sword toward the rising sun and roared, "For our ancestors, for freedom." His voice cut through the morning mist, like a blade, fierce and unyielding. Around him, thousands of warriors lifted their weapons to the sky, their battle cries merging into one thunderous roar that rolled across the valley and struck the Roman lines like the echo of an earthquake. Every man knew this would be the day history remembered, the day Gaul either lived or died. Outside the walls, Caesar had already seen their movement. He rode along the inner ramparts, his red cloak whipping in the cold autumn wind, his expression calm, yet his eyes gleaming with deadly precision. The air was thick with the scent of smoke and blood, but Caesar's composure did not waver. He had fought too many battles to be ruled by fear. Every sound, every shadow was weighed, measured, understood. He knew the relief army was gathering for its final assault. It was all or nothing, and he intended to make it everything. Then from beyond the distant hills came the first sound, a deep, rising roar that grew until it filled the sky. The Gallic horde was on the move. Hundreds of war horns blared, their notes shaking the earth. The ground trembled under the weight of charging hooves and the pounding feet of men. From the ridge lines poured a torrent of warriors, shields flashing, spears raised, banners snapping in the wind. It was as if the mountains themselves had come alive, hurling forth an ocean of humanity that surged down upon the Roman walls with unstoppable fury. At that very moment, Vercingetorix gave his own order. The great gates of Alesia burst open, and his 80,000 men rushed out, their cries echoing like thunder rolling through the valley. They charged uphill toward the same Roman lines, their weapons flashing in the sunlight. The Romans were caught between two fires, destruction from without and defiance from within. What followed was not a battle, but an apocalypse. Javelins filled the sky until it turned dark. Arrows whistled through the air like serpents seeking flesh. The clash of iron and the screams of men merged into a single, endless roar. Clouds of dust rose so thick they devoured the light of the sun. The stench of blood and burning pitch filled the air. Swords shattered, shields splintered, and men died where they stood, their cries drowned in the storm of steel. At the northern wall, the Gauls broke through the outer trenches. Their warriors swarmed over the barricades, hacking and screaming as they tried to tear through the Roman line. Roman centurions shouted orders, their voices hoarse, barely audible over the chaos. Caesar himself galloped to the breach, his horse foaming, his armor streaked with mud and blood. Behind him thundered his elite Germanic cavalry, savage riders, armed with long spears and ruthless precision. They struck the Gallic flank like a bolt of lightning, cutting through ranks of warriors as though the gods themselves had sent them. Spears flashed, shields splintered, and the bodies of men and horses fell together into the blood-soaked trenches. Still, the Gauls did not yield. The relief army sent another wave, tens of thousands charging forward, their battle cries carrying the names of their tribes into the storm. Inside the fortress, Vercingetorix's warriors battered the inner walls, scaling ladders, hurling flaming spears, and shouting defiance, even as the Romans poured boiling pitch and stones down upon them. The earth shook beneath their fury, but Caesar's lines held firm. The Romans bent but did not break. Caesar sent word to his most trusted general, Labienus, to hold the northern line at any cost. Labienus drew his sword and raised it high so his men could see. "We will die where we stand," he swore, his voice steady amid the chaos. And the men cheered, not with joy but with grim resolve. The fighting raged for hours. The trenches ran with blood like rivers after rain. The ground was slick with mud and corpses piled against the sharpened stakes that lined the Roman defenses. Smoke from burning siege engines coiled into the sky, blotting out the sun. Yet the Romans, weary and bloodied, fought with a discipline that no force on earth could match. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, Caesar climbed a mound to survey the field. Through the haze and fire, he saw the moment, the faintest falter in the Gallic line. He knew it was time. With a single command, he rallied every reserve he had left, infantry, archers and cavalry, and led them himself into the heart of the storm. The legions advanced in perfect rhythm, shields locked tight, spears thrusting in unison, their formation cut through the chaos like a machine of death. The Gauls, already exhausted and bleeding, began to waver. Their songs of war turned into cries of despair. Then, with a roar like thunder, Caesar's cavalry swept down from behind, striking the rear ranks and sealing the trap. The Gauls found themselves crushed between two walls of steel. Their courage could no longer stand against the inevitable. Their line collapsed. The screams of the dying filled the air, and then, silence. Night fell over Alesia like a shroud. The fires dimmed, the shouts faded, and only the crackle of burning wood remained. Smoke curled upward into the cold, starless sky, a requiem for the dead. The ground was carpeted with bodies, armor catching the faint moonlight. Spears jutted from the earth like grave markers. The rivers of Burgundy ran red with blood, their gentle flow carrying away the last traces of battle. In the Roman camp, Caesar walked alone among the wounded and the dying. His armor was dented, his cloak torn, his face drawn and pale with exhaustion. He had won, but there was no joy in his victory. Around him, the legions stood in silence, their faces empty, their eyes hollow. They had looked into the abyss and seen what empire demanded, not glory, but sacrifice. As dawn crept across the valley, pale and cold, the horns of Alesia sounded once more, not for battle, but for surrender. Slowly, the great gates opened. Through the haze of smoke rode Vercingetorix, the mighty chieftain of Gaul. His golden armor was darkened with ash and blood, his long hair matted, yet he carried himself with the dignity of a king. He rode slowly down the hill, the eyes of thousands upon him. The Roman soldiers watched in reverent silence, for even in defeat, they saw greatness in the man before them. When he reached Caesar, Vercingetorix dismounted. He removed his helmet, his face pale beneath the grime of war. Without a word, he drew his sword, the same blade that had rallied a nation, and cast it at Caesar's feet. The ring of steel upon stone echoed through the valley, a single sound that marked the end of a people's freedom. Caesar stood motionless. He looked down at the warrior who had dared to challenge the might of Rome. For a brief, fleeting moment, something almost like respect flickered in his eyes. He said nothing, for there was nothing left to say. In that silence, both men understood the weight of what had passed. Victory and ruin, bound forever together. Behind Vercingetorix, the gates of Alesia opened wider. From within came tens of thousands of Gauls, unarmed, broken, their faces hollow with hunger and grief. Women carried their children, old men stumbled through the mud. The Roman legions parted their ranks to let them pass. No jeers rose, no laughter, only silence, the kind born from awe and sorrow. The proud sons of Gaul laid down their freedom beneath the eagle of Rome. That morning, the imperial standard rose above the smoking ruins of Alesia. The eagle caught the first light of dawn, its golden wings shining against the grey sky, a symbol of Rome's eternal power, forged in the blood of the conquered. But beneath the ashes and silence, something deeper stirred, for though Gaul had fallen, a legend had risen, and though Vercingetorix's sword lay in the dust, his name would live forever in the heart of a nation. The fires of Alesia faded, but their smoke would haunt history for centuries. The embers that once glowed on that lonely hill were long extinguished, yet the memory of what had happened there would burn forever in the minds of men. For Rome, Alesia marked the birth of empire, the moment the Republic's ambition transformed into destiny. For Gaul, it was the death of freedom, the silencing of a proud people whose courage had nearly broken the greatest army the world had ever known. In the months that followed, Caesar moved across the land like an unrelenting storm. The legions advanced with precision, their standards gleaming in the pale sunlight as if touched by the gods themselves. Villages that once echoed with songs of defiance now stood silent. Tribe after tribe laid down their weapons, chieftains kneeling before the Roman eagle as it rose above every hill, every river, every fortress that had once called itself free. The resistance that had united Gaul began to crumble. Fields once drenched in the blood of heroes now bore the mark of Rome's discipline, roads, camps, and laws. By the year's end, the conquest was complete. Gaul was no longer a land of tribes and warriors. It had become a province of the Republic, its proud people, reduced to subjects of Caesar's will, and yet one man still stood as a symbol of their spirit: Vercingetorix. The chieftain who had dared to defy Rome was taken in chains of iron, his golden hair matted, his eyes hollow from months of captivity, yet his spirit unbroken. When he was led into the streets of Rome, the people gathered in countless numbers. They came to see the barbarian king who had once made even Caesar tremble. They cheered and shouted, hurling flowers and insults alike. But Vercingetorix did not look away. He held his head high, his silence heavier than any speech. Each step he took through the marble streets was a march of defiance, a conquered man who had lost everything but his pride. Years later, when Caesar celebrated his triumph, the grandest in Roman memory, Vercingetorix was brought forth once more. The streets blazed with light, the air filled with the sound of drums, trumpets, and cheering. Chariots carried spoils from every corner of the known world, and slaves dragged the treasures of nations behind them. But at the end of the procession came the prisoner who had once united Gaul. As the crowd roared Caesar's name, Vercingetorix walked silently beneath the towering marble arches of the Forum, his chains glinting in the sun. He was led down into the darkness beneath the city, and there, in the cold shadows of Rome's glory, he was strangled. Thus ended the life of a man, but not his legend. Rome celebrated its victory with gold, feasts, and parades. Music filled the air, and the Senate declared new honors for Caesar. The streets shimmered with banners and torches, but among the legions who had stood at Alesia, there was no laughter. Their eyes carried the ghosts of that terrible hill, the screams, the smoke, the endless clash of steel. They had seen what empire was made of. Beneath the glory, they had learned the truth that history would never erase, that empire is not built by valor or virtue, but by the graves of those who stood in its path. Centuries passed. The marble walls of Rome crumbled, its statues fell, its roads faded into dust. The empire that had seemed eternal was consumed by the same time it once sought to command. But in the heart of France, the story of Alesia endured. Generations grew up beneath the same hills that had once burned with war. Parents whispered the name of Vercingetorix to their children as they sat by the hearth, telling of the man who had stood against the might of the world and, though defeated, had given birth to the spirit of a nation. He became more than a memory. He became a symbol of courage, of unity, of a freedom that could never be chained. Even now, on quiet nights, when the wind sweeps across the hills of Burgundy, they say you can still hear it, a faint echo carried through the valleys, a whisper from the ghosts of Alesia. It is the voice of a warrior, proud and unbroken, speaking to all who would listen. His final vow still drifts across the centuries: better to die for freedom than live as slaves.